show welcome and all that. We have some water in the back, be a good hostess and all that. I will have to say there's no admission fee, obviously, but we are accepting donations both here and at the museum. The Gunflint Trail Historical Society is also looking for volunteers. And the volunteers be in all buildings, all sorts of different help, but we are in great need of them right now. So you can talk to me afterward or Bonnie. Basically anyone wearing a name tag would know about that and you can help sign up. Other than that, everyone, welcome to Joe. He works at the radio station, as I'm sure many of you are aware. And he's here today to talk about, oh, sorry. He's here today to talk about Quetico's longest serving ranger, Janice. Everyone, do a round of applause.
All right, fantastic. Great to see so many faces here today. This is definitely the way Janice probably would have liked it, depending on the mood she might have been in then. So, just to make it clear, because the presentation can go a number of different ways today. I see some familiar faces, certainly, but how many people, just by show of hands, knew Janice or had met her? That's what I thought. So we'll take kind of a lighter approach. I'll talk plenty about the process of writing the book and how it came to be and why it happened and some about Janice's passing last year as well. But I'd like to, because we didn't get much of an opportunity due to the pandemic to have a lot of closure around her death. I know I still feel that way. That we could share some stories about Janice if people are comfortable. You don't have to come to the front of the room, but just an opportunity to do a celebration of life for Janice. I think that would be pretty moving and meaningful today, but we'll talk plenty about the book too. So thank you all for being here. We'll start just by talking a little bit about our friend Janice Matichuk. This is a photo at my house near Grand Marais, near the Devil Track River where I live. I had gone away for the afternoon, that's the key, in the afternoon, and I had this pile of poplar that we had split for the writer's cabin. It was just in an upheaval, kind of where Janice is standing. And I came back a few hours later and it was perfectly stacked, just, absolutely textbook Matichuk stacking. And just, didn't ask her to, wasn't even a thing, she just had done that. And is very proud of it too, as you can tell in that photo. Yes. So Janice is the longest serving interior ranger in the history of Quetico Provincial Park, which is not far at all from where we are here at the end of the Gunflint Trail. In Cache Bay is where she was stationed for that entire time, which is also not far at all. You could get there by watercraft from essentially where we stand, or if you got on the water from here. And she was there seasonally. She was not there in the winter, but she was there for more than 3 decades, 34 plus years. And it was her island, as the title of the book is called. A lot of people identify Cache Bay and their trips through there with Janice. If you got the opportunity or you were willing to spend some time talking with her, it was always a memorable experience. She was so knowledgeable about the park, but she wanted to know stories from you too. It wasn't just a rundown of the rules, which it was, that was part of it, but it was engaging. People would stay there for hours and hours and hours. Talking with her, they'd come back, they'd bring their children, their families. Generational things happened over those decades that she was there, and people, you're coming to meet Ranger-Janice. It was an iconic experience for people. I was up there one time at the end of the season in 2018, which is when we came with the idea to make the book. And people were coming through from Chicago, grown, adults, men in their 60s who had just so much respect for Janice and reverence and knew they were in the presence of great at her island. And she did pass away last August. She got brain cancer. So, that happened. Just to preface this too, I've been to, maybe if you were at the end Gunflint at the Seagull Guard Station. I was there for a Ham Lake fire commemorative event that we had done there, and I had done a documentary about 10 years after Ham Lake, and I got up in front of the crowd, which was probably 10 times bigger than this, and got up in front of the crowd and just burst into tears for reasons that I still don't entirely know. So, and I've done a similar presentation like this twice and haven't all the way made it through, but today we're going to try to do that. There's still some emotion there, but horrible. Okay, so as it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with this area where we are, maybe even live up here in this Seagull Sag community or on the Gunflint Trail. So I think we don't have to get too much into Quetico, and interestingly enough, today Quetico is in the news, making a lot of news. There are fires burning, at least half a dozen fires, and it's led to some closures now at the Boundary Waters, Canoe Area Wilderness here on the Minnesota side. Major area, essentially Crane Lake to Basswood is closed now. So Quetico, you're going to be hearing that a lot if you follow Minnesota news, because these fires are moving toward the border. So just a side note, but it's the Canadian side of the Boundary Waters. It's a different management style than the BWCA. Some people are just absolutely obsessed with Quetico, the remoteness, and it just has different regulations in the Boundary Waters. But it's similar. This is a photo that I took when I was there in 2018, looking out from Cache Bay, staying on the island. It's a beautiful place, and it's been hard for Americans to get there impossible, essentially, these past 2 summers. Maybe in August, and people might be driving around to Port Adventure, but Cache Bay, you need a remote area border crossing permit to get in, and RABC, and that's not going to probably happen this summer. But Cache Bay, I know a lot of people, myself included, are hoping to get there in 2022. Haven't been there quite some time, so a couple of years now. All right, so this is where we get into a little bit more about Janice and how I came to meet her in the process of where the book started. That's Janice up at the water system when they installed that at Cache Bay. She loved that water treatment system that they had there, and that's me on the shore. And so I work at WTIP. It's the radio station in Grand Marais, the community radio station. And I had heard about Ranger-Janice. I knew she listened to WTIP while she was on the island. People, my colleagues, Jana Burka, a friend of mine who works there too, she was always talking about Ranger-Janice called in and said she heard this, or there's this situation happening at SAG and things like that. But I hadn't met her until 2017, and there was the Canoe Expo, and I met her. She came up and she said, "I'm Ranger-Janice," and I instantly was just, wow, this is the person I've been hearing about. She has an energy. Janice was if you connected on the same wavelength, you were very fascinated by her right away. She was just an amazing human being, and is. And so then she came to the radio station that fall, and we had a membership drive for people to support the radio station. She came in, was hanging out for a while, and I sat down with her and just interviewed her about her time at Cache Bay, and that opened up a whole. You could just go on for a long, long, long time. I have 14 hours of recorded audio, just those types of stories that we developed over the course of years later. But I knew right away that there was a lot of information there, and a lot of those stories are miraculous. There's the day, every day up there in that remote island outpost was an adventure, could have been a story. You could write something for the Boundary Waters Journal, 4,000-word story on any single day that Janice had there, just because of the people coming and going, the stories, the wildlife encounters, rescues. They weren't all heroic things, but just every day was so interesting for her over the course of those years. And she raised her children there essentially from birth up until they were teenagers, and there's so many layers to that as well. But most of those later years she was there by herself, and just going through just amazing things. And when we were up there, I spent, like I said, 3 days there at the fall when she was closing the Ranger Station in 2018, and that's where we really went a little bit deeper into some of these stories, and she started telling us about 6 canoeists from Minnesota who had been coming through in 2000. And it was just, I could tell she was getting ready to tell some pretty epic story. My buddy Matthew Baxley, who I do a podcast with about Founder Waters, him and I were up there having dinner around the table, steaks, and she was telling us the story. And she said, well, these 6 guys from Minnesota coming through Cache Bay. They had been up on Gunflint, and they were coming through. They had rented canoes from Tuscarora. They were trying to get back to American Point, and it was windy and an intense storm, rolling waves, white cap waves, and they made it go, and it was just a lot. And just the weather overtook them, and they all went in the water, all 6 of the guys, and Janice was able to save 5. So we lost one of them there. And of the 5, though, who were saved, one of them happens to be in the room today. His name's Mark Hargis. And he's one of the main characters. Actually, Mark, are you comfortable coming up for a minute? Sure. So meeting Mark through the process of the book was pretty transformative for me. I had heard it from Janice's perspective, just the situation, the rescue. So Mark and his friends went into the water, and Janice, Mark, you can read this in the book because it's a lengthy story, but the quick version is that you went in, Mark made it to an island, was screaming for his life, for help. Janice heard them mostly on instinct, actually. She barely recognized, but she knew, she felt something was off. Put on her rain suit and got geared up. She had a broken foot at the time. Jumped in the boat and motored out, not knowing for sure that people were in distress. And Mark and his friend's life were on the line in this situation. This was June 1st, 2000. And Janice motored out, and sure enough, they needed to be rescued. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mark, but I believe you credit Janice with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I said this to my, other best friend from growing up. I was like, she saved our lives, and he gets mad at me because Tom drowned. And I kind of said, Tom didn't really give her an opportunity to save his life. We stopped at, the point going on to say, my brother says, I think we should put our life jackets on. And 4 of us said, well, that's a pretty good idea. And 2 guys, Scott and Tom, didn't put their life jackets on. And, the waves were about, I don't know. When you're there and remember it, you may think it's bigger, but they had to be like 3 to 5 foot swells where the front of the canoe was out of the water and the back of the canoe was in the water, and vice versa like this. And my brother and uncle's canoe went down first, and Tom and Scott tried to swoop around and get their packs, and they tipped. And then my cousin and I, Rob, I think you could probably say hindsight is 20/20 and make different decisions if you go back. And I guess maybe I would say is, most of your biggest life mistakes are not in a book written by somebody else. Right? Most of your biggest life mistakes, maybe just about, But I think I was open to sharing, I would say, my biggest life mistake, because hopefully it saves other people. Right? Hopefully it helps other people. And I think having a life jacket on is, the difference between Tom dying and the 5 of us really being able to be saved by Janice, right? Because I think the water had to be 40, 50 degrees. I think if we didn't get a boat out there, 5 of us get hypothermia. She went out past us and picked up the 3 other guys, came back and picked Rob and I up, and by the time we got back to her ranger station, Scott was so cold he couldn't undo his belt. Right? And so, if we don't get to some safety relatively quick. You know, we're all going into hypothermic shock. And therefore, you know, I do credit her with saving my life, our lives. And, you know, I would tell you that, you know, for 10 years after Tom's drowning, it was pretty hard. It was really hard. But probably for the last 11 years, it's you know, something you can't change. And it, you know, it went from what could have we done different, wishing we did it different, to just being thankful that I had a good friend like Tom in my life for the time that I did, right? And being gracious that I had a really good friend like Tom. And I think that's, you know, what I would say about Janice, right? We were scheduled to meet her last year. I was nervously excited about that. Actually didn't know she won the equivalent of the Presidential Medal of Freedom until about 3 or 4 months ago, when Joe told me. Would have been nice to congratulate her on that. But this has really been a kind of a healing process for me too, writing this book. Brought our kids, Jenny, my wife, and Amelia, JT, and Paul. We all just spent the weekend up here at Tuscarora. Didn't know this event was planned. But that's how God works, you know, divine intervention. And you know, Joe did ask me if there was one question you could ask Janice, what would the one question be? And I would just point blank say that, you know, where are you going to spend eternity? Not to make this more of a testimonial, but a celebration of life. But, you know, my dad, unfortunately, had brain cancer in 2018, and so I went through 4 months of his brain cancer. I know what Janice went through last year, and it wasn't fun. And I just pray that I get to see her again, and, you know, like our friends and family and others, you know, be able to spend eternity with them, because that's a lot longer time frame than this short time we have here on Earth.
So Mark, my connection with Mark, my first phone call was essentially out of the blue. Janice was able to kind of remember, you know, 20 years had passed, 19 when her and I started talking about this event that Mark just shared with you. And, you know, she's had other rescues and the day-to-day, but this one stood out, the Award of Valor that Mark mentioned that she had received from the Ontario government, and just the significance of that day too. With, I know this is still raw for you, Mark, but with Tom, it took a dive team 3 days to find it in Sag. Those 3 days were very anxious for Janice, and her son was there. He was a young boy at the time, leaving. So there was, this one definitely stood out among all the rescues that Janice shared with me. So I wanted some anecdotes and to call Mark out of the blue and say, I'm Joe, I live in Gray Marais, and I'm writing a book about this woman, Janice Matichuk, and I hear your story. He didn't have to say yes by any means. And the fact that he did changed the book and essentially made the book. So it wouldn't be what it was without Mark's involvement. And then, as he said, the fact that he happened to be here for the first time in essentially 20 years with his family this particular day is pretty fine. So, thanks.
I'd just say, you know, thanks to Joe for, you know, writing this book. I think, you know, in a lot of good ways, it's ripped off a lot of old wounds for a lot of people that were affected on our end. But, you know, the whole point is just healing, right, and getting behind it. And, you know, I would just say, you know, to all of Janice's friends, you know, she did save my life. And without her, I wouldn't have 3 great kids. Without her, I wouldn't be here today sharing her story with you guys. And I just appreciate her. I wish I could have told her that to her face a year ago. And friendship and writing this book. Like I told somebody, I never imagined being a story in a book, right? And I didn't plan on that, but I'm just here to help tell Janice's story. And at the end of the book, I think the most powerful comment that I probably made in the book is that's the challenge and the opportunity to be saved, right? What are you going to do with that? How are you going to pass that forward? How do you help other people? And how do you not just let it be something without giving back to others? So I think and we've all been saved in a lot of different ways by other people who come into our lives. And so how do you pass that on to the next person? I think that would be the message that Janice would want. Save somebody else like she did. So, right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for coming. All right. Well, so there's a story about Janice. And like I said, I wanted to open this up today. At any time, if you want to share a story about Janice that's funny or just small or anything at all, just please raise your hand and I'll just, you don't even have to come up to the front. But anytime during the presentation, just throw up your hand and we'll share some stories about Janice. So anytime. But it doesn't have to be right. Okay, so I've already talked quite a bit about the process. I mean, this is Janice and her element right there. If you ever made it up to Cache Bay in the summer, you were going through, or just you saw her coming and going, like that photo to me is Janice right there. Just the park uniform, totally in her element, her space. When you were on the island, she was running the show. You could do your own thing. We went canoeing. We went looked at the pitch grass. We did just some lollygagging around. But you're in the ranger station, which is where she lived inside the ranger station area. It was her turf, and she knew everything, every sound. If something was off, she knew all the birds, all the animals, all the trees. Of course, the trees were a big thing for her on the island. She hugged them and talked to them and was involved in their lives, essentially. She'd come back in the spring every time. It was a huge hug. Oh, look how you've grown, and oh, you lost that limb, but you're still so beautiful. I mean, the trees were the land. It was, she was in tune with nature, to say the least. So yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes that Janice. So we formulate this idea. I get Janice on board, and she was not initially too enthusiastic of me capturing her life story and putting it into a book. She was hesitant because she was still working for the park at the time, that some of that might overlap or irritate the park, some of the rules that she learned to bend, so to say, over the time. But mostly just the fact I'm going to be sharing her stories. And, how would you feel if I approached you and said, I'm interested in writing a book about your life, and anybody in the world could buy it on Amazon if they wanted to. How would you feel about that? And we're going to talk about some uncomfortable circumstances potentially. So yeah, she was a little bit hesitant, but she also learned to trust me. Her and I had a pretty instant connection of storytelling and humor. We kind of could relate on those wavelengths, and that's what brought us together to say, okay, I think we're going to be able to do this. And the idea wasn't even about Janice's life per se, from like a chronological approach to a timeline of her life. It was mostly the types of stories that Mark shared and other stories about animal encounters and moose and all these sort of entertaining anecdotes, as opposed to here's this person that grew up in Anapoken in this small town and went to Sault Ste. Marie in Sweden, and none of that was originally going to be in the book. It was just about Janice the Ranger, essentially celebrating that. And so that's where we set out. Like even when I pitched the book to some publishers originally, that's what it was, Janice the Ranger. And so then it started to evolve from there. And again, Mark, who happens to be here, see, I got your G-Wing with the honors up there. Sorry about that. But this is a photo that Mark had on a camera from the trip. This is Tom in front. This is Tom, right, Mark?
Yep, that's right.
And then that's, are you in that
I
photo?
think that's Jeff there.
You took this photo, maybe?
I think I took that photo.
Yeah, you can see the Tuscarora logo on that. And so I was starting to piece together these stories and capture, you know, which ones were going to stand out among these many rescues. Again, as I said, Janice Mark is one example of certainly someone who credits their life to Janice, from being pulled out of a capsized canoe, just to other circumstances that have come up in Quetico where she had to intervene and be involved and put her life on the line, which she was willing to do. Even in that circumstance, Janice to go out by herself in that boat in those conditions she put her life on the line, and that was one example. So I started putting it together with these types of stories. Then we started to, just by nature, because she raised Ingela, her daughter, here on the left, and Leaf, her son, that we started to get into more about Janice's personal life and life on the island, because the kids were raised there and growing up on an island. Sounds maybe cool to us. Sounds nice to spend a summer on an island, but maybe to a 13, 14-year-old kid that had different interests, and so how some of those hardships had to be balanced out and over time. But the kids were a huge part of even the visitors coming through, the canoeists who were getting in through Cache Bay. They would make games, they would play pranks on some of the canoeists. Leaf one time, at least one time, crawled under the desk. Janice stalled. She was issuing a permit for some guys to go in, and they were kind of uptight, these guys. I hope none of you were in the room. Janice said they were uptight. And so she was stalling. I just got something wrong with the printer, and I got to read these rules again, buying some time. Meanwhile, Leaf had crawled under the desk, and he's down there tying the guy's shoes together. And Janice knew it. She was just keeping the kids entertained. And then he didn't see, and he didn't trip. No one was injured in the making of this joke. He did, he was like, well, what in the world, how did this happen? Then Lee pops up from behind the desk, gotta get him kind of thing. So that was their TV, that was their, Instagram or whatever, real time. You got to stay entertained and engaged with the process. And nature was a huge part of it. They would go on canoe trips up into Quetico that, my buddy is here visiting, Kevin is here visiting this weekend. We did some boundary water stuff. Yesterday, Friday, we've been paddling pretty hard, canoeing, portaging, and the heat stuff. And we're, today, oh gosh, we're working hard. Janice and her kids would do that stuff like nothing, just all the time. They'd go on, miles and miles and miles of paddling, portaging through Quetico, which is, more rugged than the BWC. Harder portages, harder to find. Everything about it's just a little taken up a notch. And they just grew up in that. They're just immersed in it, and it's just the way things were for them. And I got to know Leaf and Ingela. I knew Leaf a little bit. He's actually has been working at Cache Bay some, and it's kind of the future remains unknown. What's going to happen? Who's going to post Cache Bay to be the next interior ranger? Only because it's been closed through COVID these past 2 years. So we'll find out. I need to reach out to Leaf actually and see what his plans are. But Ingela is she and I didn't necessarily get off on the right out of the gate. She was pretty hesitant about sharing some of the stories, and there's some family stories that aren't in the book that are quite raw, and that at the request of Janice and the kids aren't there, and so that was an issue for Ingela was, who are you and why are you asking me questions? Right initially, very standoffish, to put it kind of mildly. And over time, she just let me in slowly. This was over the course of about 18 months that we finally started to where we could talk to one another or communicate at the very least over email or sometimes just we could communicate, which was great and also essential. And to bring it around full circle where she actually wrote the foreword to the book to show kind of how far her and I came on that journey together as well. So a lot of things took place over the course of writing this book, of getting involved with the family and the kids who are great people. So that's where it really took off. Talking about the family dynamics and the kids, Janice's divorce, and then her time alone on the island. But I realized then that this book probably was going to have some more substance to it if we could evolve it, not just Janice the Ranger in these heroic tales, but about, well, who are you, Janice? You're actually a very complex and fascinating human being, aside from saving people who have capsized in their canoe. There's a lot more to you than just that. And wanted to get into that a little bit deeper. And Janice started to we'll come back in a minute. So the best parts of writing the book, that's much more pleasant to talk about right now. A word, basically just the fact that I had the license or the freedom to communicate with a park ranger at any time. And the superintendent, Trevor Gibbs of Quetico, was so unbelievably gracious to me. I could get out, I could get the motor up to Cache Bay. Maybe I shouldn't. Anyway, I had some clearance from the park to kind of come and go, which was great. And he was so supportive. It also, as much as Mark was a critical component of making the book a reality, the park's support of the book was equally as important. It just wouldn't have been able to have been the same had I not been able to go to the island, to see Janice working in her element, that I had some actual anecdotes and observations of my own to apply to the context of the stories that she's telling me about this place. So I just got to hang out. This is behind the desk at the ranger station, talking with, checking in visitors and just hanging out there and just spending time at Cache Bay. And then she'd come back or she'd call, Joe, I forgot to tell you this other story. And I hit record on the equipment and we'd have another 2 hours of stuff. And just hearing the stories about Janice were just the absolute best. Spending time with her. She came down and stayed about a week at my place down there with my wife and I, and she just would just hang out. We'd come back we went to Albuquerque for Thanksgiving. She stayed, took care of our cat for like 10 days. She stayed. And we came back and she said, Janice, what have you been doing? How are you? How's it going? She said, I haven't really been doing anything. I just kind of been here at the house. And we're like, oh, okay, that sounds good. All right, how you doing? We noticed all these paintings around our place that weren't there before, and all more wood had been stacked and organized. More things had been done around the house. The fences fixed up. This is in November, and then she says, yeah. And then I was up at naming on the prom. I was at the prom. I was at she's saying like half a dozen different places she went, and so on the 10 days she's there, she had gone 6 of those nights to different people's places, had dinner made for her, done all these social things, went to North Howe, went to the country dance, does all these things, and I'm like, I haven't done that much stuff in 3 years. and you did all those social things, you did all this labor around the house, which we didn't ask you to do, and thank you. You did all this artwork around the house, you're creating things, and her response though was like, I haven't done anything. And it was just like, wow, I just couldn't, it didn't make sense to me. And so maybe if we can go back, I don't know if you can go back, but so clinical depression, really. and it was real for Janice, and she lived with it most of her life. She traces it back to an incident I think she was in 5th grade or elementary school, grade 5, same kid. But something just in her brain balance, chemical was just off a little bit or imbalanced, and she had clinical depression, and she struggled with it. It would consume her at times. Things like those examples of all that stuff she had done, for her response to be, I haven't done anything. It just kind of clouded things sometimes in her outlook of the world. Right or wrong, or that's just how she felt. And there are some stories about the ranger station where she would be working so hard, and she'd go to bed in her uniform because she was just not even too tired, just too down to change her clothes, and she'd lay down and she'd get up the next day and just go to business. But as soon as they show up the next day, the guest, the canoeist who would come from all over the world, boom, she's on her A game, just back at it. And I can relate to some of that, not so much of the depression, but I would learn from Janice about that, and speaking with medical professionals and psychiatrists, psychologists, and so forth too, about how that works in the brain, what it means for a human being. But some of that, like at a radio station, if I'm having a bad day, I can't go on at noon or 7 a.m. and convey that to somebody. You gotta kind of fake it through sometimes. And Janice would do that too for canoeists. Just, you would never know that she was hurting, suffering even, because she could turn it on. She loved this job, loved working there so much. That passion was so real that she could hide that, clinical, just mental illness, mental health side of it. She could mask that to make your trip into Quetico better, for her not to impact your trip. She could do that. She could transform that, hide that. And I marvel at her because I know it took a toll on her. Definitely did on her physical health over the years. But the point of that being that this is when her and I started to talk about mental health and her depression as a real thing and not something to be ashamed about, that this is just a reality in your life. That's when the book really went into a different place, where it became not just Janice, this heroic character on an island that saves people's lives, but into a real person who has real stories and real issues just like all of us do, and we're going to put that out there in the world. So chapter 5 is the chapter in the book that focuses on depression and mental health, and a lot of people have said, chapter 1 with Mark and the rescue is kind of meaning the most, for lack of a better word, kind of, gets your blood going the most. But chapter 5 has meant the most to people of all the chapters in the book, and that's the one that I remember as clear as yesterday when Janice called up and said, I'm ready to talk about that now, and it can be in the book. And that's when it went in this new direction, which I'm just so forever thankful for. There's Sherry Moe is a psychologist who lives in Hoagland, which is if you're not from the area, it's up the Arrowhead. She lives up the Arrowhead Trail, which is near Hoagland. So kind of not like Gunflint, but a similar pathway inland from Lake Superior here in Blue County. And Sherry had met Janice at some events in Grand Marais, the Dragon Boat Festival, and knew about Janice as this kind of huge towering figure at the end of the trail. But she shared some perspective about mental health, depression, and talked about Janice. And someone from the Twin Cities called Sherry and said, I just read this book about this Quetico Ranger. I've been into Quetico, and I know this woman, and she shared that she has depression, and I think that I do. And could you counsel me through this? I want to talk to somebody. So Sherry called me and said, she certainly did not tell me the person's name or anything like that, but she said, Joe, I wanted to let you know that this book is, essentially now changing people's lives, and people are, responding to it. So that just kind of shows you a little bit about why that changed. was so important for the book. Yeah, I kind of dabbled into some of this already, most of that actually, but getting into her life, feeling like I was maybe crying sometimes. One example was, there was we needed to fact check stuff. This was like probably in April of 2020 last year, and I called Janice's house. She picks up on like the third or fourth ring. I was like, hello, and her Janice voice, which I can't do at all, obviously. But she said, hello, and Janice, hey, it's Joe. She goes, it's you again. And I was just like, oh God. But in a teasing way, but it was a genuine thing. Like I was really, constantly trying to get information from her to write this book. So that was a pretty intensive thing. They sat back and forth, hammering her constantly, having the minute details. What color was the boat? What's the type of motor on the boat? What did it say, Mark? All these small things. And then COVID really made it hard. I never got to see Janice in 2020. The last time I saw her was at when she was at our house over Thanksgiving that time. And we had really ambitious plans. The final chapter of the book was originally supposed to be Mark and I and Janice and someone else with Mark going back to Cat Bay and spending a few days there. We had clearance from the park to do all this. And we were going to go to the site where Tom drowned and make some peace or have some closure there. And it was all lined up to do. And then the park got shut down because of the pandemic. And so just that whole chapter fell off the table. And also, closure for Mark. I know that was a huge thing that we were going to do. And now we're in a scramble. The publishers are like, well, what's going to be the last chapter of the book? And, I don't know. And we want to get it out in November. And it's just kind of turned into a tailspin as the pandemic's happening and all of that at the same time. So it was a whirlwind of things that happened, like from April, May, June 2020 was a challenge. And then that's when Janice got sick and had brain cancer. So it just kept getting layered on. It was just like you couldn't even believe that it was happening. I remember when she called and told me she had brain cancer, got off the phone, just sitting there in my little writer's shack that I have on the property, and just in a state of just total numb shock. Just the state of the world that was just like, what in the world is this? This is just, it's just too much. It's just too much. But that's just me sitting there as a healthy, 30-something-year-old person, and then to know what Janice is going through and her family, it was heavy. It still is heavy, and that's why events like this are actually helpful. When there's some closure happening, even just being up here on Janice's turf here at the end of Gunflint. But it was a hard time. So to see her through, and her memory started to go, and her ability to talk, and it all went really quick. From June until August when she passed, it was just a very fast time, in a very hard time. So that was a hard part of the book, definitely. There's a writer's shack where I wrote the whole thing in that little building. North House Folk School came out to our property and built that. It's kind of a replica of Thoreau's cabin. And they build those. It's a classic North House, and I convinced Greg and his team that they should just do it in my house. Everybody, all the students can be in the North Woods, and how great it'll be. So that was nice. I paid for it, but yes, it is. So I got Betsy Bowen's old desk in there. She's a local artist, and sat down and hammered the book out in there over the course of about the research and the interviews with people like Mark, and of course all the audio with Janice was about a year, and then I wrote it in about 3 months or so. But then, with that, waiting for that last chapter, and then when that got changed around. So it took a little bit longer than that, but that's where it all went down, and it's still hanging out in there all the time. So that's where that took place. But after coming off the island, where we did the podcast episode, where we watched Janice close down the ranger station, and it's like, okay, there's a whole idea we want going to write a book about Janice Matichuk, who wants to be the publisher, and there was some interest from some people in our region up here in northeastern Minnesota, but then I was at the Midwest Mountaineering Expo in Minneapolis, April 2019, and Cliff Jacobson, who's a canoeist, maybe some of you know his name, he said, there's these young guys at 10,000 Lakes Publishing, and they were from Minneapolis, and they're up and coming. You should meet these guys. And just they're young guys, Sean, and they came over, and I told them about Ranger-Janice, and they knew about her through the Boundary Waters Journal. They had read some stuff about her in there, and I said, I want to write a book about her, and they said, let's do it, we'll do it. And we kind of had a handshake deal with the right there, and we worked out the contract later, but they were the publishers, and they're, like I said, they're new up and coming, but we got it done, thanks to them. And she was so passionate about Quetico in particular, but the Boundary Waters, that her form of advocacy is something that I can really rally behind and relate to, where it's just get out there and do it and see it and be in it, and not preachy about even some of the issues. She had her feelings about, twin metals or things like that. It could be, what in the world kind of a thought was her approach to that. Like, why would that's going to flow into Quetico, and that enrages me. But she wouldn't, be on the front lines of a protest or something. She was out in the woods, and that's how she advocated. Was just, I'm out here living it, and you should come check it out too, because this place is amazing. And I can relate to that form of, spirited. Come check it out. Let's protect this place, and let's be out here, not just for the sake of protecting it. Let's do this. So I wanted to. The other hard part about this has been Janice and I had all these grandiose ideas that she was going to sell the book in the ranger station. She was still going to be working there when it was going to be released. That's why we kind of got rushed about, let's get this done, because you're going to be working there maybe 5, 6 more years, into your 70s, maybe a little bit beyond. However long the park, would let her, and Trevor, the superintendent, said she could have worked there until we were never going to ask her to leave, basically. And so she would still be working there now if it wasn't the pandemic. She didn't get brain cancer. She'd be out there today working. And like I said, she'd engage with people. She would sell shirts. She sold more merchandise at Cache Bay than she was so proud of this, than all the other ranger stations combined. And she was not short to tell you that too. But she said, I'll be able to sell this book. Everyone's going to buy it when they come through here. And of course, that never happened. She wanted to do the interviews with Minnesota Public Radio, Star Tribune, Thunder Bay newspaper. And I was like, yeah, and then I'll have the reporter call you, huh? Okay, sure. And or we do them together, it was the whole thing. We were going to be teammates in the delivery of this book, because it was, we were both gearing up for it. And I was looking forward to that too. Doing this together, that was a big thing. And so I've been doing these, and it's just been hard sometimes too. So that's hopefully, yes. I don't know if anybody would like to share a story or a memory that you have about Janice. I think we've got about 13 minutes left maybe on the clock. So
before you do, I meant to mention this before when I was introducing him, but he is selling the book today. So if you want a signed copy, that's going to be available after we're done talking today. Or not mentioned.
That's fine. Yeah, Janice couldn't have said that better. Please.
Yeah, just we saw Janice, and she was a fantastic saleswoman. But I just wanted to mention that one picture showed flowers in the front here in the middle of the Boundary Waters, and it's just bedrock. And she always would, and it was one of the times she would break the rules. She told us that every year she would smuggle flowers into the and plant them, and the soil was so poor up there. The only place she could get soil is she'd find rotted birch trees and she found that that pulp in the middle was good soil, so she sort of stirred that in. And had she lived, I would say that smuggled a big bag of organic soil.
Nice. Great, thank you. Yeah.
I homeowner on SAG, and we had known her and some friends from cabin, and she'd gone to town and come back in the evening. She knew he was there. She pulled her boat up. And she had dinner with us, and it's always sticks out in my mind. She had dinner. She probably left about 10:30. And it's dark. It is June, probably. It's spring, and she pulled the boat out. She got on the channel and she just sat there for about 10 or 15 minutes and let her eyes adjust. Got her lights on the boat, and off she went. And it's 10:30 by now. It took about an hour, hour and a half to go all the way back there, and she rated us. And I always just thought that was so cool. And just crazy kind of to do at night, to go across SAG and really get it to where she's going. It's some tight spots, and, you know, didn't bother her. You know, she didn't even think twice about it. It was just part of life, and her attitude was, you know, like, again, she wanted to preserve it, but she was a go use it, you know, kind of person. Like, we've done this, and I want you guys to go experience. And I always remember checking in there with that, just that go get 'em kind of attitude. We always went in there to fish. We'd just paddle in, fish for the day, and we'd paddle out. And that attitude of us going in there just to fish kind of impressed her. So she would always be super friendly with that.
Yeah, right. You,
Can I add to that?
please?
Janice, we are on the Seagull River, and we had Janice for dinner, and she had a leaf with her, and it got to be about 10 or 10:30, and it was stormy. And we pleaded with them to spend the night with us,
Sure.
and she, no way. So she took off with Leaf. They got out into SAG, and it was so dark. It was one of those totally dark nights. And she and Leaf spent the night on an island with a safety blanket on them, or some kind of boat tarp, something.
Sure.
That was Janice.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to say was she was mystical. And I don't remember, is that in the book?
Like her spirituality side of
But
things? Oh,
her
yeah.
belief in animals, and her mother was an otter. Also, along with hearing the calls for help, she told us that it was like subconscious. She couldn't really hear them, but something about, yeah.
Yeah, right, yep, no, there's her spiritual side was, she was very firm in her conviction about just the processes of life, and that, I think that's why death to her, toward the end, I never really got, she had some, she was overcome a little bit, maybe, I don't wanna use the word afraid, but she knew that it was just it was just circling, and that, some of those nights, the part of the book, I don't want to give away the ending to people who haven't read it or anything, but it's not like a dramatic tale necessarily, but she would go lay out, and this wasn't one just this specific time happened, but she did this a lot. She'd just go lay out and SAG outside off the island and just float there in the pitch black, not even a boat light or any light, and just float in the water, you know, away from the island for quite some ways. I mean, if I was from here to there off the island in the pitch black, I'd be pretty freaked out and couldn't feel. And she would lay on her back for, you know, until she got so tired she couldn't float. 10, 15, 20 minutes floating out, you know, from here up to the museum away from the island or further. And that was a thing that she was just very open to what the earth offered. And really in tune with nature and any sort of, you know, energy that was off. She could feel that, and I think that made her extraordinarily effective at her job, and also very interesting. Yeah, so, got room for Bonnie. Janice's friend Bonnie, who is the director of Chik-Wauk. Yeah, please. Who's also in the book, and would come and chat with me, and I know it's so hard for you to.
I have, actually can't read the book yet, but, Janice's birthday is in 6 days, it's the 24th. It's gonna be her 67th birthday. She taught me so much. When you would go to her island, she would walk around the island and show you all the neat things around there. There was a stick on the ground, she would break it up and she would fill in a hole just to make soil. I mean, she was a steward. We went on a couple canoe trips, and she would always do that. She always would grab a twig or do something, and oh, gotta clean this up. And she'd be walking around the portages and doing that. It was just amazing. I won't tell the R-rated versions of some of the canoe trips that we were on before as little kids here. But oh my gosh, I just loved all the adventures. I miss having the adventures with her. I would love it when she would come down to the museum here, and actually last year I did have her scheduled to come and do the talk, and it was about the same time, so it worked out, and she was going to show her her slide presentation of the Quetico Park. She was very passionate. It was a great person, like I said. Sorry. And I'm hoping Ingela and Leaf are watching this FaceTime live too, so I hope Ingela and Leaf are out there watching this. But it's a celebration of life for Janice. And so, yeah, we had some, one time, I don't know if I told you, I probably did, we went up to the gold mine up on, you go up Sanga, and you walk up through Betsy's Portage, and you're walking on this dirt road, and there's a gold mine up there, a camp. And we come up to the camp, I don't know how long we walked. True fashion of Janice, you know, she's looking around, opens the door, and start going in, looking to see if anybody's there. Woo-hoo! Woo! I can just hear her voice, that's Janice, you know, looking for somebody shows up. She starts talking to them, and that's how she was. She just went in and, hey, I'm Janice Matichuk, you know, and it was the best. So, yeah. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Janice, you know, knew the same community, the people who live on Sag and the Canadian side and in the U.S. side, and some of the outfitters up here. They were really, I mean, those were her core group of people in her life at this time. I think a lot of them also felt the same about her, and they had fun on the radios. They had, you know, for dinner, it was a big thing, and then that started to even move down the trail to Grand Marais too, where people. I went in the co-op with her both of the time. There was a local grocery store in town, and you know, I mean, I worked at the radio and a lot, you know, hey Joe, this kind of thing. But Janice was like, she was 20 times what I'd go through, like. Hey, you know, hey Janice, you're that ranger up at Cafe, aren't you? Just people knew her all over the place, and I was just like, Janice, you're the celebrity. Keep it down, Joe. You know, whatever. But she had an impact on this place. I mean, she is going to be remembered for generations, definitely, for the impact that she had on just people's lives, their children. Somebody that you could look up to and learn from about the wilderness, about how you know, you can talk about if you have depression. Ranger-Janice talked about it. That's a big thing to be able to just be open about that. She lived on an island. She had that clinical thing, and she talked about it. I can talk about something I've got going on with me too. Down to the things that you heard from Mark earlier in the show. I mean, it doesn't get more real than that to hear somebody that's credited his life to her and her efforts. So across the board, it was such a privilege to get to know Janice on the level that I did, get to be able to share her story. It comes with a great amount of responsibility too that I don't take lightly. And like I said, I wish that she was up here. That would have made this. It's a great day. I'm so grateful that we were able to do this. This feels like a celebration of life for her, but I wish that she was standing right there beside me today. Take it from there. So thanks.